Can you imagine the sheer panic of a teenager barely past childhood, suddenly shoved into a dark, deep hole, simply for agreeing to meet someone? What does it tell us when such a terrifying ordeal happens under the guise of belonging, of, fraternity? And what does justice truly look like for a young life so profoundly endangered? Today, we're diving deep into a Supreme Court case that really captured the nation's attention precisely because it forces us to confront these chilling questions.
Absolutely. We'll be looking closely at the Supreme Court's decision in People of the Philippines versus Jonnel Delos Reyes y Tungol. That's GR Nom 264958, dated August 14th, 2023.
Okay.
And our goal, really, in this deep dive is to understand the core facts of this pretty disturbing case. We'll follow its journey through the Philippine legal system and ultimately grasp the Supreme Court's final judgment on this widely discussed matter.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The events that led to the Supreme Court ruling, they happened in Bataan, right? Over a few days.
That's right. October 2014. Specifically between the 23rd and the 25th.
And the accused is Jonnel Delos Reyes y Tungol. The victim, tragically, is just 15 years old, identified as AAA 264958 for privacy.
Yes, and the prosecution's version of events, which really formed the basis of the conviction, paints a truly disturbing picture.
Tell us about that. What did the prosecution say happened?
Well, according to their case, which relied heavily on the victim's own account, AAA 264958 went with De Los Reyes, supposedly to collect some money. This was presented as part of a potential initiation into the Triskelion fraternity.
Okay, so a fraternity link right from the start.
Exactly. They got to Bataan around mid-morning on October 23rd. But instead of collecting money, De Los Reyes apparently started a drinking session.
Not what the victim expected, I imagine.
Not at all. And as the afternoon went on, the person they were supposed to meet never showed up. So the victim, understandably, wanted to go home.
And this is where things took a really dark turn.
Yeah, this is where it gets incredibly troubling. The prosecution detailed how De Los Reyes allegedly pulled out a knife and then forced the victim to go to a nearby fraternity camp. The testimony described, this horrifying experience, the 15-year-old having his hands tied with nylon cord, his eyes and mouth covered with cloth. And then, under the pretense of some kind of twisted initiation rite, he was told to walk forward and then suddenly pushed into a pit, an open pit, about 20 feet deep.
20 feet, just pushed in. Unbelievable.
The ordeal, according to the prosecution, lasted for 2 whole days. 2 agonizing days in that pit.
How did he even get out?
It wasn't until October 25th that Turi A264958 managed to escape. He climbed out somehow.
Thank goodness.
And immediately after escaping, he went straight for help to the barangay hall, the local community office, and then reported everything to the police.
Okay, so that's the prosecution's case.
Yeah.
Very clear, very horrifying. But the defense must have had a counter-narrative.
Oh, completely different. De Los Reyes testified that actually, on October 24th, notice the date difference.
A day after the prosecution says this started.
Yeah. Yes. He claims the victim came to his house and asked him to go to Bataan to meet friends.
So the victim initiated the trip, according to the defense.
That's the claim. He said they just went swimming together that day. And then, 2 days later, October 26th, police just showed up at his house and arrested him. No explanation given, according to him.
Wow. 2 starkly different stories presented to the court.
Exactly. So the regional trial court in Bataan had to weigh all this evidence.
And what did they decide?
They sided with the prosecution. In their decision, dated May 22, 2019, they found Jonnel Delos Reyes guilty beyond reasonable doubt. The crime, serious illegal detention.
And the sentence?
Reclusion Perpetua, which is essentially life imprisonment under Philippine law plus other penalties.
Okay, so a conviction at the trial court level. Did it go higher?
It did. It went to the Court of Appeals. And on May 26, 2021, the CA, well, they largely agreed with the trial court. They upheld the guilty verdict. They did tweak the damages slightly, though. They specified the amounts. PHP $75,000 each for civil indemnity, moral damages, and exemplary damages, making it very clear.
Right, so conviction upheld, damages clarified, and that led to the Supreme Court.
That's the final step. The core question for the Supreme Court was basically, did the Court of Appeals make the right call? Was affirming the trial court's conviction for serious illegal detention correct, based on the law and the evidence?
Did the evidence truly prove all the necessary legal elements of such a serious crime? That was the crux of it.
Precisely.
What did the Supreme Court say?
Well, in their decision, again, that's August 14th, 2023, GR number 264958, they affirmed the Court of Appeals in full.
So conviction stands.
Conviction stands. They definitively upheld the conviction of Jonnel Delos Reyes y Tungol for serious illegal detention under Article 267 of the Revised Penal Code as amended.
Okay, so let's break down those legal elements the Supreme Court focused on. What makes detention serious and illegal in this context?
Right. The court reiterated the key elements. First, the offender has to be a private individual. Delos Reyes clearly was, not a state agent.
Simple enough.
Second, the offender kidnaps or detains someone, deprives them of liberty. And the court found that, tying the victim's hands, pushing him into a pit, that's a clear intentional deprivation of liberty.
Seems obvious given the facts they accepted.
Third, the detention has to be illegal, not ordered by any competent authority. Again, clearly the case here.
Okay, private person, illegal deprivation of liberty. What's the fourth element, the one that makes it serious?
Ah, yes. The fourth element requires one of several specific circumstances to be present. The law lists things like detention lasting more than 5 days.
Which wasn't the case here, it was 2 days.
Right. Or if it's committed by pretending to be a public authority, also not applicable. Or if serious physical injuries are inflicted, or threats to kill are made.
Which might be implied by the act itself, but wasn't the main point, maybe?
Possibly. But the absolutely critical circumstance here, the one that undeniably applied, was that the victim was a minor.
15 years old.
Exactly. 15 years old. That fact alone, the victim's minority, was undisputed. And it automatically elevates the crime to serious illegal detention under the law. That was sufficient.
Got it. So the victim's age was key. Now, didn't the defense raise some points about the evidence, trying to cast doubt? Something about a medical certificate?
Yes, they did. They pointed out that the medical certificate the victim got after escaping didn't specifically mention marks or injuries on his wrists.
And the argument was, if he was tied tightly with nylon cord for 2 days, surely there'd be marks.
That was their argument. They suggested this discrepancy undermined his whole story about being tied up.
How did the Supreme Court handle that?
They addressed it directly. They essentially said that, look, minor inconsistencies like this, or omissions in a medical report, don't automatically destroy a witness's credibility, especially when the core testimony about the main criminal acts being detained, being pushed into the pit remains consistent and believable.
So the absence of wrist marks wasn't enough to overturn the conviction?
No. The Supreme Court deferred to the trial court's assessment. The trial judge saw the victim testify, observed his demeanor, and found him credible. The CA agreed. The Supreme Court basically said there was no strong reason to overturn those factual findings. They called such discrepancies immaterial details that don't negate the crime itself.
Okay, that makes sense. Credibility assessment primarily lies with the trial court. And the sentence, Reclusion Perpetua, that was also upheld.
Yes, affirmed. The court explained that for serious illegal detention, the penalty ranges from reclusion perpetua to death. Since the law says when you have two indivisible penalties like that, and no mitigating or aggravating circumstances are proven either way.
Which there weren't here.
Right, then you impose the lesser penalty. So reclusion perpetua was the correct sentence.
And the money. The damage is awarded to the victim.
Also affirmed in full. The PHP $75,000 each for civil indemnity, moral damages, and exemplary damages. The court confirmed this aligns with established jurisprudence, citing the People v. Giuditta case as a guideline.
And they added interest?
Yes, they imposed a 6% interest per annum on all those monetary awards, running from when the judgment becomes final until it's fully paid. Standard practice, really.
This case, it really does lay bare a disturbing reality, doesn't it? Violence masked as initiation rites. Considering the lasting trauma inflicted on a minor, on a 15-year-old, it really makes you wonder, how do we as a society ensure the protection of our youth from things like this? And how do we truly hold perpetrators accountable beyond just the letter of the law? It's a heavy question. What are your thoughts on this ruling? We genuinely like to know. Share your comments below, and please hit that favorite or like button if this deep dive helped clarify this important case for you. Now, before we wrap up, let's quickly recap some key legal doctrines we saw playing out here.
Definitely. First and foremost is serious illegal detention itself. It's about unlawfully taking away someone's liberty. The intent to do so is key. And it's especially serious legally when the victim is a minor.
Right. And then there's the credibility of witnesses. We saw how much weight is given to the trial court's findings on this, especially when the appellate court agrees, unless, they miss something major.
Absolutely. And related to that is the idea of immaterial inconsistencies. Minor slip-ups or discrepancies in testimony don't necessarily sink the whole ship, particularly if they don't touch the core facts of the crime, like the wrist marks issue here.
Good point. The penalty for serious illegal detention, specifically when a minor is the victim, and no other special circumstances apply, that's reclusion perpetua.
Correct. And finally, the damages. Civil indemnity, moral damages, and exemplary damages. These aren't just symbolic. They're meant to provide some form of redress for the victim and, importantly, act as a deterrent to others.
For more in-depth explorations of significant legal cases like this one, and to stay informed about crucial developments shaping our nation, please make sure you subscribe to our channel. Your support truly allows us to continue bringing you these vital deep dives.